The sound of iron shackles scraped against the cold stone floor as Katherine Andrews shifted her weight, the damp chill of the cellar seeping into her bones as she huddled against the wall. 3 days had passed since her father had locked her down here, 3 days of darkness broken only by the thin sliver of light that crept beneath the heavy oak door at the top of the stairs. It was 1875, and in Winnemucca, Nevada, a woman who spoke against her father's plans to marry her off to the town's wealthiest landowner might as well have committed treason. Katherine, known to everyone as Kate, pulled her thin cotton dress tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to penetrate to her very core. At 22, she had expected more from life than to be bartered like cattle to Silas Montgomery, a man 3 decades her senior, whose 3 previous wives had all died under circumstances that set tongues wagging throughout the county. "I will not marry him," she had declared at Sunday dinner, standing tall as her father's face turned crimson with rage. "I would sooner die than be that man's wife." Her mother had gasped, her younger sisters had stared wide-eyed, and her father, Jeremiah Andrews, the most respected banker in Winnemucca, had grabbed her by the arm and dragged her down to the cellar without a word. "You'll stay down here until you come to your senses," he had growled, the disappointment in his eyes cutting deeper than any physical blow could have. A proper daughter does not speak against her father's wishes. The sound of hoofbeats outside pulled Kate from her bitter memories. Visitors were rare at the Andrews estate, located as it was at the edge of town. She pressed her ear against the wall, straining to hear the conversation taking place above. "Mr. Andrews, I've come about the cattle you were interested in purchasing," a deep voice said, the words barely audible through the floorboards. "Mr. Malone, please come in." "I wasn't expecting you until next week," her father replied, his voice transforming from the cold hardness she had grown accustomed to into the warm, affable tone he reserved for business. Kate sank back against the wall, disappointment washing over her. Just another business meeting. No hope of rescue, no chance at freedom. Upstairs, Thomas Malone removed his hat as he stepped into the Andrews' elegant home. At 28, he had built a reputation as one of the most successful cattle ranchers in the territory. His ranch to the north of Winnemucca spanned over 5,000 acres, and his breeding stock was considered the finest in the state. "I was passing through earlier than expected," Thomas explained, his blue eyes taking in the opulent furnishings of the banker's home. "Thought I'd stop by to discuss terms before heading back to the ranch." Of course," Jeremiah said, leading him into the study. "My wife will bring us some coffee. Please have a seat." As Thomas settled into a leather chair, he noticed the strained expressions on the faces of Mrs. Andrews and the 2 young girls sitting in the parlor. Something felt off about the household, a tension that hung in the air like the stillness before a thunderstorm. "Beautiful family you have, Mr. Andrews," Thomas remarked, nodding toward the parlor. "Thank you," Jeremiah replied stiffly. "I have another daughter as well, but she's indisposed at the moment." The hesitation before the word indisposed caught Thomas's attention. In his years of dealing with men of all sorts, he had developed an ear for lies and half-truths. "Nothing serious, I hope," he said casually. "Just a touch of female hysteria," Jeremiah said dismissively. "Nothing a few days of quiet reflection won't cure." Thomas nodded, but his instincts were on alert. Something in the way Mrs. Andrews flinched at her husband's words. The way the younger girls exchanged worried glances, it all spoke of something beyond a simple illness. As they discussed terms for the cattle purchase, Thomas caught snippets of hushed conversation from the kitchen where Mrs. Andrews had gone to prepare coffee. "It's been 3 days, Martha," a servant whispered, The poor girl will catch her death in that cellar." "Hush, Ellie," Mrs. Andrews replied, her voice trembling. "You know how he gets when anyone questions his authority." Thomas's jaw clenched. He had heard stories of men who locked away wives or daughters who displeased them, but he had dismissed them as exaggerations. The practice seemed medieval, something from the old countries, not something that happened in the Nevada Territory in 1875. When Mrs. Andrews brought in the coffee, Thomas noticed her reddened eyes and the slight tremble in her hands as she placed the tray on the desk. "Mrs. Andrews," he said gently, "I couldn't help but overhear that you might have someone ill in the house. I've recently acquired some medicines from San Francisco. Perhaps I could be of assistance." Jeremiah's face darkened. "That won't be necessary, Malone. As I said, it's merely a case of a young woman's hysterics. Nothing that concerns you or your business here." "Of course," Thomas replied, keeping his tone light despite the anger building inside him. "Just offering a neighborly hand." The meeting concluded an hour later with terms agreed upon for 20 head of prime Hereford cattle. As Thomas prepared to leave, he deliberately left his gloves on Jeremiah's desk. "I'll be back tomorrow to finalize the paperwork," he said, shaking the banker's hand. "And to collect my gloves, if you don't mind." "Not at all," Jeremiah replied, walking him to the door. Outside, Thomas mounted his horse but didn't immediately ride away. Instead, he circled around to the back of the property, his eyes scanning the house. There, at ground level, he spotted small windows partially obscured by overgrown bushes, cellar windows. And if his suspicions were correct, that's where the missing daughter was being kept. Night had fallen by the time Thomas returned to the Andrews estate. He tethered his horse a good distance away and approached on foot, moving silently through the shadows until he reached the cellar windows he had spotted earlier. Crouching down, he cleared away some of the vegetation and peered inside. The cellar was dark, but a sliver of moonlight revealed a figure huddled in the corner. A young woman, her arms wrapped around her knees, her head bowed. Thomas tapped gently on the glass. The figure startled, looking up with wide, frightened eyes. "Miss Andrews," he whispered, loud enough to be heard through the glass but not so loud as to alert the household. Kate stared at the face in the window, certain she was hallucinating from hunger and cold. But when the face spoke again, she scrambled to her feet and approached the window. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Thomas Malone. I was here earlier to see your father about some cattle," he explained. "I overheard something that didn't sit right with me. Are you being held down here against your will?" Kate's eyes filled with tears. "My father locked me here because I refused to marry Silas Montgomery. He says I'll stay until I agree." Thomas's expression hardened. "That's not right, Miss Andrews. No one deserves to be treated this way." "There's nothing to be done," Kate replied, resignation in her voice. "The cellar door is locked, and my father has the only key." Thomas glanced at the small window barely large enough for a child to squeeze through, let alone a grown woman or himself. "I'll be back," he promised. "Tomorrow night, be ready." Before Kate could respond, he disappeared from view, leaving her wondering if she had imagined the entire encounter. But for the first time in 3 days, a flicker of hope ignited within her. The following day dragged endlessly. Kate paced the cellar, her mind filled with thoughts of the stranger who had appeared at her window. Thomas Malone. She rolled the name around in her mind, clinging to it like a lifeline in the darkness of her prison. Above, life continued as normal in the Andrews household. Jeremiah left for the bank, Mrs. Andrews supervised the housework, and the younger girls attended their lessons with the local tutor. And as promised, Thomas Malone returned in the afternoon to collect his gloves and finalize the cattle purchase. "Mr. Malone, punctual as always," Jeremiah greeted him. "Come in. The papers are ready for your signature." Thomas followed him into the study, his eyes alert for any sign of the cellar entrance. As they conducted their business, he noticed a heavy iron key hanging on a hook near the door, too large for a typical room, but perfect for a cellar. "Mr. Andrews," Thomas said casually as they finished their business, "I couldn't help but admire your home. It's rare to find such fine construction in these parts." Jeremiah's chest puffed with pride. "Built it myself with some help from the local men. Solid foundation, good stonework in the cellar. This house will stand for generations." "A cellar, you say? That's a luxury out here. Most homes I've seen barely have proper floors, let alone underground storage," Thomas remarked, guiding the conversation where he wanted it to go. "Indeed," Jeremiah replied. "Essential for storing preserves and keeping wine at the proper temperature." "Would you care for a tour of the property before you leave?" Thomas seized the opportunity. "I would be delighted." As Jeremiah led him through the house, Thomas made mental notes of the layout, particularly the location of the cellar door, a heavy oak structure at the end of the kitchen hallway. He also confirmed his suspicion about the key on the hook. "Your family seems to be feeling better today," Thomas observed as they returned to the front of the house. "I don't see the signs of illness that were evident yesterday." Jeremiah's expression tightened. "Yes, well, as I said, nothing serious." "I'm glad to hear it," Thomas replied, shaking the banker's hand. "I'll have the cattle delivered by the end of the week." As he rode away from the Andrews estate, Thomas's mind was already formulating a plan. He would need to move quickly and quietly. The longer Kate remained in that cellar, the greater the risk to her health and possibly her life. Night fell over Winnemucca, bringing with it a chill that seeped through Kate's thin dress. She had spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, wondering if the stranger Thomas would return as promised. As the hours passed with no sign of him, doubt began to gnaw at her. Perhaps he had reconsidered. Perhaps he had been caught. Perhaps he had simply forgotten about the banker's daughter locked in a cellar. The sound of the house settling into silence above her told Kate that her family had retired for the night. She huddled in the corner, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth, trying not to give in to despair. Then she heard a soft scraping at the cellar door. At first, she thought it might be rats, which had been her unwelcome companions these past days. But the sound was too deliberate, too purposeful. "Miss Andrews," a hushed voice called through the door. "Can you hear me?" Kate scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. "Yes, I'm here. Stand back from the door," Thomas instructed. Kate moved away, watching as the door shuddered slightly. Thomas was working at the lock with some kind of tool. After what seemed like an eternity, there was a sharp crack and the door swung open, revealing Thomas Malone silhouetted against the dim light of the kitchen beyond. "Come quickly," he whispered, extending his hand. And quietly. Kate didn't hesitate. She rushed up the stairs and took his offered hand. The warmth of his fingers around hers, the first human comfort she had felt in days. As they crept through the sleeping house, Kate caught a glimpse of her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her once vibrant copper hair hung in limp strands. Her face was smudged with dirt, and her green eyes were wide with fear and hope. Thomas led her through the kitchen and out the back door to where two horses waited in the shadows of the cottonwood trees. "Can you ride?" he asked, helping her onto one of the mounts. "Yes," Kate replied, gathering the reins with hands that trembled from both cold and excitement. "We need to put distance between us and this place before dawn," Thomas explained, swinging up onto his own horse. "My ranch is about 4 hours' ride north. You'll be safe there." As they rode away from the Andrews estate, Kate felt a surge of emotions, relief at her escape, fear of what would happen when her father discovered her gone, and an overwhelming gratitude toward the man riding beside her. "Why did you help me?" she asked as they put the outskirts of Winnemucca behind them. "You don't even know me." Thomas was silent for a moment, his face half hidden in the moonlight. "I know what it's like to be trapped," he finally said. "My father was a hard man who believed discipline meant breaking a person's spirit. No one deserves to live that way, especially not someone whose only crime was speaking her mind." Kate studied him, taking in his strong profile, the determined set of his jaw. "You risked a lot for a stranger. My father is an influential man in these parts." "I can handle Jeremiah Andrews," Thomas replied with confidence. "Right now, my concern is getting you somewhere safe and warm. You're half frozen from that cellar." As if on cue, Kate shivered, her body finally registering the chill of the night air after the initial rush of adrenaline. "Here," Thomas said, shrugging out of his coat and passing it to her without slowing his horse. "Put this on." Kate wrapped the coat around her shoulders, enveloped in its warmth and the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to it. "Thank you," she murmured, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. They rode in companionable silence for a time, following a trail that wound through sagebrush and scrub juniper, the vast Nevada sky arching overhead, studded with stars. "May I ask why your father locked you away?" Thomas ventured after a while. Kate's hands tightened on the reins. "I refused to marry Silas Montgomery. He's the wealthiest landowner in the county and nearly 50 years old. His previous wives have all died under suspicious circumstances. My father arranged the match without consulting me, and when I refused, he decided to break my will." Thomas's expression darkened. "Montgomery has a reputation that extends beyond Winnemucca. No father should force his daughter into such a marriage." "My father sees women as property," Kate said bitterly. "Assets to be traded for advantage. My mother has never defied him, and he expected the same compliance from his daughters." "And yet you stood your ground," Thomas observed, a note of admiration in his voice. "That takes courage." Kate had never thought of herself as particularly brave. Stubborn, yes, her father had often said as much. But courage, that was a quality she associated with men who faced down outlaws or battled the harsh elements of the frontier. Not with a banker's daughter who simply refused to be sold like a piece of livestock. "It wasn't courage," she admitted. "It was survival. I've heard stories about Montgomery's wives. The first died in childbirth because he wouldn't send for a doctor. The second fell down the stairs with suspicious bruises already on her face. The third supposedly drowned in the creek behind his property, a creek that's barely knee-deep in the deepest part." Thomas nodded grimly. "I've heard the same stories. The law turns a blind eye because of his money and influence. Your instincts were right." As they continued their journey, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Kate's exhaustion was catching up with her, making it difficult to stay upright in the saddle. "Not much further," Thomas assured her, noticing her drooping posture. "We'll be at my ranch before full daylight." The landscape began to change as they rode northward. The flat, dusty terrain gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. In the distance, Kate could see the silhouette of mountains against the lightening sky. "Your land?" she asked, gesturing toward the changing vista. Thomas nodded. "The Lazy M Ranch, 5,000 acres of the best grazing land in Nevada. Started with nothing but 100 acres and 50 head of cattle 6 years ago." "You've done well for yourself," Kate observed, impressed by both the achievement and the modesty with which he mentioned it. "I've been fortunate," he replied, "and stubborn like someone else I've recently met." Kate smiled, the first genuine smile to cross her face in days. There was something about Thomas Malone that put her at ease despite the precariousness of her situation. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence he exuded, or the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, they rode over a final rise, and the Lazy M Ranch spread out before them, a sprawling complex of buildings, centered around a large two-story house built of pine and local stone. Corrals and outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the lush spring grass. "It's beautiful," Kate breathed, taking in the scene. After days in the dark cellar, the sight of the sun-washed ranch beneath the vast blue Nevada sky felt like stepping into another world. "Welcome to your sanctuary, Miss Andrews," Thomas said, leading the way down the slope toward the ranch house. "For as long as you need it." As they approached the main house, a stocky man with graying hair emerged onto the porch, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. When he recognized Thomas, his posture relaxed, but his eyebrows rose at the sight of Kate. "Mr. Malone," he called, "didn't expect you back so soon, and with company, I see." "Morning, Hank," Thomas replied, dismounting and helping Kate down from her horse. "This is Miss Katherine Andrews. She'll be staying with us for a while. Miss Andrews, this is Hank Miller, my foreman and the best cowhand in the territory." Hank tipped his hat, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts about the unexpected guest. "Madam, you look like you could use some rest and a hot meal." Kate suddenly became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, the dirt-smudged dress, the tangled hair, the dark circles that surely ringed her eyes after 3 days in the cellar. "I'm afraid I'm not presenting my best self, Mr. Miller," she said, attempting to smooth her wrinkled dress. "No judgment here, madam," Hank replied kindly. "The boss has a habit of bringing home strays, though usually they're of the 4-legged variety." Thomas shot his foreman a look that was half amused, half warning. "Hank, please ask Mrs. Cooper to prepare a room for Miss Andrews and draw a bath. And perhaps some breakfast, already on it," came a woman's voice from the doorway. A plump, gray-haired woman in an apron stood there, her sharp eyes taking in Kate's condition with a single glance. "Land sakes, child, you look half dead on your feet. Come inside this instant." Kate found herself ushered into the house by Mrs. Cooper, who turned out to be the ranch's housekeeper and cook. The woman's motherly efficiency was both overwhelming and comforting after days of isolation. "Mr. Malone sent word ahead that you might be joining us, Mrs. Cooper explained as she led Kate upstairs to a bedroom. "Didn't give details, but he said you'd been through an ordeal and needed care. I've got a bath being drawn in the washroom, and there are some clothes in the wardrobe that might fit you belonged to Mr. Malone's sister when she visited last summer." Kate was stunned. "He sent word ahead. But how? When?" Mrs. Cooper smiled. "Mr. Malone is nothing if not thorough. Sent one of the ranch hands riding ahead last night with instructions. Now, you get yourself into that bath while I lay out some clothes. Then it's breakfast and straight to bed for you. You look like you haven't slept in days." The luxury of sinking into a hot bath after 3 days in the cold, damp cellar brought tears to Kate's eyes. She scrubbed away the dirt and the lingering sense of confinement, allowing herself to believe, for the first time, that she might truly be free of her father's control. Dressed in a borrowed blue calico dress that was a bit loose but clean and warm, Kate made her way downstairs to find Thomas waiting in the dining room, a pot of coffee and plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. "You look refreshed," he said, standing as she entered. "I feel human again," Kate replied, taking the seat he offered. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness, Mr. Malone." "Thomas, please," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "And no thanks are necessary. I couldn't in good conscience leave you in that situation." As Kate ate her first proper meal in days, Thomas outlined what he had in mind for her safety. "Your father will discover you missing by now," he said. "He'll likely send men looking for you. Winnemucca isn't that large, and someone might have seen us leaving town." Kate's appetite faltered at the reminder of her precarious situation. "What will happen when they come here?" "They won't find you," Thomas assured her. "Few people connect me to this ranch. I do most of my business through agents. And if anyone does come asking, the hands all know to say they haven't seen any strange women. You can stay here as long as needed, until we figure out a more permanent solution." "I don't want to impose or bring trouble to your door," Kate protested, though the thought of leaving the safety of the ranch filled her with dread. "It's no imposition," Thomas replied firmly. "This house has stood empty except for me and Mrs. Cooper for too long. Having someone else here is a welcome change." After breakfast, exhaustion finally caught up with Kate. With Mrs. Cooper's urging, she retired to the bedroom prepared for her, falling into a deep sleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. She slept through the day and into the evening, her body recovering from the ordeal of her imprisonment. When she awoke, the room was bathed in the golden light of sunset. For a moment, panic gripped her as she tried to remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she relaxed into the soft mattress, savoring the feeling of safety. A knock at the door roused her fully. "Miss Andrews," Mrs. Cooper called. "Are you awake? There's dinner waiting downstairs when you're ready." "Thank you," Kate replied, sitting up. "I'll be down shortly." She found a brush and mirror on the dressing table and attempted to make herself presentable. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror seemed changed, somehow still recognizably Katherine Andrews with her copper hair and green eyes, but with a new wariness in her expression, a hardness that hadn't been there before her time in the cellar. Downstairs, she found Thomas in the study, poring over ledgers by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, his face brightening. "You look much better," he said, closing the book. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Kate admitted. "Your home is lovely." "Thank you." "It's still a work in progress. I have plans to expand the east wing and add a proper library," he said, gesturing for her to join him. "Mrs. Cooper has dinner ready in the dining room if you're hungry." Over a meal of venison stew and freshly baked bread, they talked more freely than they had during their nighttime escape. Kate learned that Thomas had come from Pennsylvania originally, the son of a stern factory owner who had beaten ambition into his children. "I left home at 16, he explained, worked my way west on cattle drives and in mining camps, saved every penny until I had enough to buy my first plot of land and a small herd. The rest just grew from there." "No family?" Kate asked, curious about the man who had risked so much to help her. A shadow crossed Thomas's face. "My mother died when I was young. My father remarried, but his new wife had little use for another woman's children. I have a sister in San Francisco married to a shipping merchant, and a brother somewhere in Colorado, though I haven't heard from him in years." Kate nodded, understanding the fragmentation of families that was so common in the West. "And you never married?" Thomas smiled ruefully. "Never found the time, or the right woman. Building a ranch leaves little opportunity for courting." "Well, you've built something remarkable," Kate said sincerely. "Anyone would be proud of what you've accomplished here." A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their meal. For Kate, it was a novel experience dining with a man who treated her as an equal, who valued her opinions and listened when she spoke. Her father's dinner table had always been a place of rigid hierarchy, where women spoke only when spoken to. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked finally, the question that had been hanging between them since their arrival at the ranch. Kate stared into her coffee cup, considering. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go home. My father will either lock me up again or force the marriage to Montgomery. I have an aunt in Denver who might take me in, but getting there—" "I could arrange passage," Thomas offered. "A stage leaves from Winnemucca to Elko every Thursday, and from there you can catch the train east." The offer was generous, and the logical part of Kate's mind knew she should accept it. But something held her back, a reluctance to leave this place, this man who had shown her more kindness in one day than she had experienced in years. "I need time to think," she said finally. "If you're certain I'm not imposing, perhaps I could stay a little longer, just until I make proper arrangements." Thomas's expression softened. "You can stay as long as you need. This ranch is large enough that your presence won't cause any disruption, and Mrs. Cooper has already taken a shine to you." Relief washed over Kate. "Thank you. I promise I won't abuse your hospitality." "I know you won't," Thomas replied with a smile that warmed something deep inside her. The next morning brought news from town. Hank returned from an errand in Winnemucca, with word that Jeremiah Andrews had indeed discovered his daughter's absence and had men searching for her. "They're asking about any strangers passing through," Hank reported to Thomas as they stood in the barn, out of Kate's earshot. "And Andrews has offered a reward for information leading to her return." Thomas's jaw tightened. "How much?" $500, Hank replied. "Enough to turn heads." "Double the guard on the property," Thomas instructed. "No one comes or goes without my knowledge. And send word to the line cabins to keep an eye out for strangers." Hank nodded. "Already done. The boys know to keep quiet about our guest. But boss, this can't go on indefinitely. Andrews has connections with the territorial governor if he decides to make this official." "I know," Thomas said grimly. "But I won't send her back to be locked up or forced into marriage with a man who's likely murdered 3 wives already." "Never said you should," Hank replied. "Just saying we need a plan. A young, unmarried woman living at a bachelor's ranch, even one as respectable as the Lazy M, will cause talk eventually." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "I'm working on it. For now, just keep things quiet." As days turned into a week, Kate found herself settling into life at the Lazy M Ranch. She helped Mrs. Cooper with household tasks, learned to bake bread in the huge kitchen stove, and even assisted with the accounts, her education as a banker's daughter proving useful as Thomas expanded his cattle operation. For his part, Thomas found himself increasingly drawn to the spirited young woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Her intelligence, her quick wit, her determination to forge her own path, all these qualities appealed to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. They fell into a routine of dining together in the evenings, their conversations stretching late into the night as they discovered shared interests and perspectives. Kate's knowledge of literature surprised and delighted Thomas, who had built a modest library but rarely had anyone with whom to discuss the books. "Tennyson has always been a favorite," Kate admitted one evening as they sat before the fire in the study. "Though my father considered poetry a frivolous pursuit for a young woman who should be focused on household management." "Your father seems to have very definite ideas about a woman's place," Thomas observed, pouring her another cup of tea. Kate smiled wryly. "Indeed. A woman should be decorative, obedient, and above all, silent unless spoken to. You can imagine his horror when I developed opinions of my own." "I find your opinions refreshing," Thomas said, his blue eyes holding hers. "Too many people in this world, men and women alike, simply parrot what they've been told to think." The warmth in his gaze sent a flutter through Kate's chest. Over the past week, she had become increasingly aware of Thomas not just as her rescuer or host, but as a man, a handsome, thoughtful man whose company she enjoyed more than she cared to admit. Such thoughts were dangerous. Kate knew she couldn't stay at the Lazy M indefinitely. Sooner or later, her father would track her down, or gossip would reach Winnemucca about the mysterious woman living at Thomas Malone's ranch. Her presence put Thomas's reputation and possibly his safety at risk. On the 10th day of her stay, Kate made her decision. She found Thomas in the corral, working with a young colt, his movements confident and gentle as he guided the animal around the enclosure. "I need to leave," she announced without preamble as she approached the fence. Thomas looked up, surprise and something like dismay crossing his features. He handed the colt's lead to a waiting ranch hand and came to join her. "Has something happened?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Kate shook her head. "No, but it will. I can't hide here forever, Thomas. My father won't stop looking, and eventually someone will talk. I won't bring trouble to your door after everything you've done for me." Thomas studied her face, noting the determination in her green eyes. "Where will you go?" "Denver, as we discussed. My aunt may not welcome me with open arms, but she'll provide a roof over my head until I can find employment. As a governess, a companion. Those are the usual options for young women of your background," Thomas said, a note of challenge in his voice. Kate lifted her chin. "If necessary, yes. I'm not afraid of work, Thomas, and any position is better than being Montgomery's fourth wife and eventual victim." Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture Kate had come to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. "I don't doubt your capabilities, Kate, but I've grown accustomed to your presence here. The ranch feels more like a home with you in it." The admission hung between them, fraught with unspoken emotion. Kate's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain practical. "That's kind of you to say, but it doesn't change the facts. My continued presence here puts you at risk. What if there was a way you could stay?" Thomas asked, his voice low and intense. "A way that would silence the gossips and give you protection under the law." Kate's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Thomas stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I know this is sudden, and I'm not expressing it as eloquently as you deserve. But these past days have shown me what my life has been missing. Your intelligence, your courage, your spirit. I admire everything about you, Kate. I think I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing up to your circumstances instead of being crushed by them." Kate stared at him, stunned by the declaration. "Thomas, you can't." "I can," he interrupted gently. "And I do. I'm asking you to marry me, Katherine Andrews. Not out of necessity or convenience, but because I believe we could build a good life together. A true partnership." Tears welled in Kate's eyes, emotions warring within her. Joy at his words, fear that he was acting out of misplaced chivalry, uncertainty about rushing into another arrangement where her future would be decided by a man. "This is too fast," she protested weakly. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Thomas insisted. "I know you're brave and principled. I know you're intelligent and kind. I know I'm happier in your company than I've ever been alone. The rest we can discover together day by day." He paused, his expression softening. "Unless, of course, you don't share my feelings. In which case, I'll arrange for your passage to Denver with no hard feelings." Kate searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity or calculation. She found none, only open, honest affection and a vulnerability that touched her deeply. "I do have feelings for you," she admitted quietly. "But I'm afraid. My father's idea of marriage was ownership. I can't live that way, Thomas. I need to know that my voice will be heard, that my thoughts and desires matter." "I would never silence you," Thomas said fervently. "Your mind is one of the things I treasure most about you. I want a wife, not a servant or a possession." Kate considered his words, weighing them against her fears and hopes. In Thomas, she had found something rare, a man who valued her for her mind as well as her person, who had risked his reputation and safety to free her from unjust imprisonment. "Yes," she said finally, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I'll marry you, Thomas Malone, not to escape my father or because I have no other options, but because I believe we could build something beautiful together." The smile that broke across Thomas's face was like the sun emerging from clouds. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with reverence. "You've made me the happiest man in Nevada territory, Kate Andrews. I promise you won't regret it." "I should hope not," she replied with a smile, "because I plan to be very vocal if I do." Thomas laughed, the sound rich and warm in the clear mountain air. "I would expect nothing less." The wedding took place 3 days later in the lazy Mtk's main house, with only the ranch hands, Mrs. Cooper, and a traveling preacher as witnesses. Kate wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Cooper had altered from one of Thomas's sister's gowns, with wildflowers gathered from the hills around the ranch woven into her copper hair. As they exchanged vows before the fireplace in the great room, Kate felt none of the trepidation she had expected. Instead, a deep sense of rightness settled over her, as if her life had been moving toward this moment through all its twists and turns. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, closing his Bible with a smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Malone." Thomas drew Kate into his arms, his kiss a promise of all they would build together. Around them, the ranch hands whooped and cheered. Hank wiped suspiciously at his eyes, and Mrs. Cooper beamed like a proud mother. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, a feast prepared by Mrs. Cooper, music from a ranch hand's fiddle, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As the night deepened, Thomas led his new wife up the stairs to what was now their shared bedroom. "Are you happy, Mrs. Malone?" he asked softly as he closed the door behind them. Kate touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, "though I expect there will be challenges ahead." "Your father," Thomas guessed, drawing her into his arms. "He won't give up easily," Kate warned. "He'll see this as a personal affront, his daughter not only escaping his authority but marrying without his permission or blessing." "Let him come," Thomas said, his tone resolute. "You're my wife now. He has no power over you anymore." The confidence in his voice reassured Kate. In Thomas's arms, with his ring on her finger and his name now hers, she felt a security she had never known. Their wedding night was a revelation. Thomas's tenderness, his concern for her comfort and pleasure, showed Kate yet another dimension of the man she had married. In the quiet intimacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other fully, their bodies joining as their lives had. Afterward, lying in Thomas's embrace as moonlight spilled through the window, Kate marveled at the turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she had been locked in a dark cellar, facing a future of submission or continued punishment. Now she was the wife of a man who cherished her mind as much as her body, the mistress of a prosperous ranch, with the freedom to shape her own destiny. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "How quickly life can change," Kate replied, nestling closer to him. "And how grateful I am that you happened to visit my father that day." "It wasn't entirely chance," Thomas admitted. "I had heard rumors about Andrews seeking to marry his daughter to Montgomery. When I overheard the servants talking about you being locked away, I put the pieces together." Kate raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "Are you saying you came to my father's house with the intention of helping me?" Thomas had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Not exactly. I did have legitimate business with him, but I might have left my gloves deliberately so I'd have a reason to return." Kate laughed softly, shaking her head in wonder. "My rescuing knight, although I think you're more of a cowboy than a knight." "A cowboy suits me better," Thomas agreed, pulling her back into his arms. "Less armor to polish." Their peaceful newlywed existence lasted exactly 17 days. On the morning of the 18th day of their marriage, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced riders approaching the ranch. Thomas, who had been reviewing cattle contracts in the study, was alerted by one of the hands. "6 riders coming in fast, boss," the young cowboy reported. "Look like they mean business." Thomas moved to the window, his expression darkening as he recognized the lead rider, Jeremiah Andrews, his face set in lines of fury even at this distance. "Get Hank and 3 men with rifles on the porch," Thomas instructed. "No shooting unless I give the word, but I want them to see we're prepared." The ranch hand nodded and hurried off. Thomas turned to find Kate standing in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "My father?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Thomas nodded. "And some men I don't recognize. Hired guns, possibly." He crossed to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Stay inside, Kate. Let me handle this." Kate's chin came up in that stubborn tilt he had come to know so well. "He's my father, and I'm the cause of this confrontation. I won't hide while you face danger on my behalf." Thomas recognized the futility of arguing. "At least stay on the porch with Hank and the men. If things go badly, they have instructions to get you to safety." Before Kate could protest further, the sound of horses entering the yard drew their attention. Thomas strode out onto the porch, positioning himself at the top of the steps with Kate slightly behind him. Hank and 3 ranch hands flanked them, rifles held ready but not aimed. Jeremiah Andrews reined his horse to a stop, his cold gaze taking in the scene before him. Behind him, 5 hard-faced men waited, hands resting near their holsters. "Malone," Andrews spat, dismounting stiffly. "I should have known you were behind my daughter's disappearance." "Kidnapping is a hanging offense in this territory." "No kidnapping took place," Thomas replied evenly. "I simply provided assistance to a woman being held prisoner against her will. That's a crime as well, Mr. Andrews." Andrews's face flushed with rage. "She is my daughter. I have the right to discipline her as I see fit. Not by locking her in a cellar for days without adequate food or water," Thomas countered, his voice hardening. "Not by trying to force her into marriage with a man 3 times her age who likely murdered his previous wives." "You have no proof of such slander," Andrews sneered. "And regardless, a father's authority over his unmarried daughter is absolute. Katherine, come here this instant. We're going home." Kate stepped forward to stand beside Thomas, her hand finding his in a gesture that did not go unnoticed by her father. "I am home, father, and I'm no longer unmarried." Andrews stared, confusion giving way to comprehension and then to a deeper fury. "You married him, without my consent. Without a proper ceremony or announcement. We were married by Reverend Johnson 2 weeks ago," Thomas confirmed. "It was a small ceremony but entirely legal. I have the certificate inside if you'd like to see it." For a moment, Andrews seemed at a loss for words, his plans for retrieving his wayward daughter clearly derailed by this development. Then his eyes narrowed calculatingly. "She was underage. The marriage isn't valid without parental consent." "I'm 22, father," Kate reminded him. "I haven't been underage for a year now. My birthday was last April, remember? You gave me a Bible and a lecture on wifely submission." Andrews's mouth worked silently for a moment before he turned his attention back to Thomas. "You've stolen what was mine, Malone. My daughter, the connections her marriage would have brought, the advantage to my business all gone because you couldn't mind your own affairs." Kate isn't property to be stolen, Thomas replied, his voice level despite the anger building inside him. She's a woman who made her own choice. And now she's my wife, under my protection. Andrews glared at them both, then gestured to the men behind him. We'll see about that. I have men who say they saw you forcibly removing my daughter from my home. Kidnapping, breaking, and entering those are serious charges, Malone. Serious enough to hang for. And I have witnesses who saw the condition your daughter was in when she arrived here, Thomas countered. Malnourished, bruised, terrified. How do you think a jury would view a father who locks his grown daughter in a cellar without proper food or sanitation? A tense silence fell as the two men assessed each other. The hired guns behind Andrews shifted uneasily, clearly not having expected armed resistance at the ranch. Finally, Kate spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Father, it's over. I'm married now, legally and irrevocably. Even if you could force me to return, which you can't, you couldn't undo what's done. I suggest you accept reality and leave us in peace. Andrews's cold eyes fixed on his daughter. You'll regret this defiance, Katherine. When this cowboy tires of you, don't come crawling back expecting my help. I won't need it, Kate replied steadily. Thomas and I are building a life together. A good life based on mutual respect and affection, things I never experienced in your house. The barb struck home. Andrews flinched slightly before mastering himself. Very well. You've made your bed, now lie in it. But don't think this is the end, Malone. Winnemucca is a small territory and I have influence. So do I, Thomas replied, steel underlying his calm tone. And unlike you, I've earned the loyalty of those around me rather than purchasing it. I suggest you consider that before making any moves against me or my wife. For a long moment, Andrews seemed to weigh his options, his gaze moving from Thomas to the armed men on the porch to his daughter's resolute face. Finally, he turned abruptly and remounted his horse. This isn't over, he said, the words carrying a distinct threat. With a jerk of his head to his hired men, he wheeled his horse and rode out of the yard, the cloud of dust from their departure hanging in the air like the aftermath of a storm. Kate let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders sagging slightly. Thomas's arm came around her, steady and supportive. Are you all right? He asked softly, leading her back into the house as Hank dispersed the men to resume their duties. Yes, Kate said, though her voice trembled slightly. I never stood up to him like that before, not directly. It was always passive resistance or secret defiance. Thomas brushed a strand of copper hair from her face. You were magnificent. I think you surprised him as much as yourself. He won't give up, Kate warned, sinking into a chair in the study. My father holds grudges until death and beyond. He'll look for ways to hurt us, your business, your reputation, anything he can touch. Let him try, Thomas said grimly. I didn't build this ranch by backing down from bullies, whether they wear bankers' suits or carry 6 shooters. We'll face whatever comes together. Kate looked up at her husband, drawing strength from his confidence. Together, she agreed, reaching for his hand. In the weeks that followed, Jeremiah Andrews made good on his threats in subtle ways. Suppliers in Winnemucca suddenly couldn't fill the lazy, empty orders. The bank that had previously handled Thomas's business developed concerns about his accounts. Rumors began to circulate about the circumstances of Kate's departure from her father's home and her hasty marriage. Thomas countered each move with the calm determination that characterized everything he did. He established relationships with suppliers in Elko and Reno. He moved his banking to a competitor in Carson City. And he invited the most influential ranchers in the territory to a grand barbecue at the Lazy M, where Kate charmed them with her intelligence and grace. putting to rest any unsavory rumors. As summer gave way to autumn, Kate found her place at the ranch, not just as Thomas's wife, but as a vital part of its operations. Her education and quick mind made her an asset in managing the business side of the ranch, freeing Thomas to focus on expanding their herds and improving the bloodlines of their cattle. Their partnership deepened in all aspects of life. In the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered the joy of physical love unfettered by shame or duty. In the day-to-day running of the ranch, they found a rhythm of shared responsibility and mutual respect. And in quiet evenings by the fire, they built dreams for the future, dreams of children, of growth, of a legacy that would outlast them both. On a crisp October morning, Kate woke feeling unusually queasy. She dismissed it as nothing, but when the same feeling returned the next day and the next, she sought out Mrs. Cooper's advice. The housekeeper's face broke into a knowing smile as Kate described her symptoms. "When was your last monthly time, Mrs. Malone?" she asked gently. Kate calculated quickly, her eyes widening as she realized the answer. "Almost 7 weeks ago. Do you think?" "I'd say you and the boss are expecting a little cowhen come spring," Mrs. Cooper said, patting Kate's hand. "The queasiness usually passes after the first few months. Ginger tea helps in the meantime." That evening, Kate waited until she and Thomas were alone in their bedroom before sharing the news. She watched his face as understanding dawned, saw the wonder and joy that transformed his features. "A baby," he whispered, one hand reaching out to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby," Kate nodded, her own eyes bright with happy tears. "According to Mrs. Cooper's calculations, sometime in early May." Thomas gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was building this ranch, I thought it was enough, the land, the cattle, the business. But then you came into my life, and now a child. It's more than I ever dared hope for." Kate kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "You gave me freedom, Thomas, freedom to be myself, to speak my mind, to build a life on my own terms. This child will know that same freedom to grow up loved and respected, never silenced or diminished." As winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow to the higher pastures and quiet evenings by the fire, Kate's body changed, her slender frame softening as their child grew within her. Thomas watched these changes with undisguised adoration, his protective instincts heightened by her condition. "You don't need to hover quite so much," Kate teased one evening as he insisted on carrying a basket of mending that she was perfectly capable of managing herself. "I'm with child, not made of glass." "Humor me," Thomas replied with a sheepish grin. "It's my first time at this." "Mine too," Kate reminded him, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. "But women have been having babies since the beginning of time, usually while continuing to work the fields or tend the home." "Not my wife," Thomas said firmly. "You'll rest as much as needed and leave the heavy work to others." "Doctor's orders." Kate raised an eyebrow. "The doctor said I should maintain my normal activities as long as I feel comfortable doing so. And I'm perfectly comfortable carrying a basket of socks, Thomas." Thomas recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and surrendered the basket with good grace. "Just promise you'll ask for help when you need it." "I promise," Kate agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Now, shall we continue the book we started last night? I'm eager to see how Mr. Dickens resolves the mystery." As they settled before the fire, Thomas reading aloud from Great Expectations, while Kate worked on darning socks, both were acutely aware of their blessings. The warmth of their home, the security of their love, The promise of new life growing all these things had seemed impossible just 6 months earlier, when Kate languished in her father's cellar, and Thomas managed his ranch in solitude. News from Winnemucca reached them intermittently throughout the winter. In January, they learned that Silas Montgomery had finally found a fourth wife, a widow from Sacramento, with a substantial inheritance of her own. In February, word came that Jeremiah Andrews had suffered a minor stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed on his left side. "You want to visit him?" Thomas asked when the news arrived. "I would understand if you did." Kate considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "There's nothing I could say or do that would change who he is or how he sees me. My presence would only agitate him, and that wouldn't be good for his recovery." Thomas nodded, respecting her decision, though part of him had hoped for reconciliation. He had seen firsthand how the weight of her father's rejection still pained her at times, despite her new happiness. "If you change your mind, we'll go," he assured her. "Just say the word." Spring came early to Nevada that year. By March, the snow had melted from all but the highest peaks, and the ranch lands turned a vibrant green. Calving season kept Thomas and the hands busy from dawn to dusk, while Kate, now in her 7th month of pregnancy, focused on preparing the nursery in the room adjacent to their bedroom. On a mild April afternoon, as Kate sat on the porch shelling peas for dinner, a single rider approached the ranch. She recognized the bay mare before she could make out the rider, her mother's favorite horse, Thomas. She called, setting aside the bowl of peas as she struggled to her feet, her advanced pregnancy making quick movement difficult. Thomas emerged from the barn, saw the approaching rider, and hurried to Kate's side. "Is that my mother?" Kate confirmed, her heart racing. Something must have happened. They waited together at the bottom of the porch steps as Martha Andrews rode into the yard. She looked thinner than Kate remembered, her face lined with worry, but there was a new determination in her bearing as she dismounted without assistance. "Katherine," she said, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of her daughter's swollen belly. "Oh, my dear girl," Kate moved forward, embracing her mother for the first time in nearly a year. "Mother, what are you doing here? Is Father?" "Your father is recovering slowly," Martha replied, stepping back to study her daughter's face. "But that's not why I've come. I've left him, Katherine." The statement was so unexpected that Kate could only stare. Her mother, the epitome of the obedient, silent wife, had left her husband. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," Thomas suggested gently, offering his arm to Mrs. Andrews. "You look tired from your journey." Once settled in the parlor with tea and Mrs. Cooper's fresh baked scones, Martha explained her presence. "After your father's stroke, he became even more controlling, more bitter. His anger at your escape and marriage consumed him. Nothing I did pleased him. And then last week, I found out about Montgomery's new wife." "What about her?" Kate asked, sensing there was more to the story. "She's dead," Martha said bluntly. "Fell from a second-story window at Montgomery's house. The official story is that she was cleaning the windows and lost her balance, but one of the servants told a different tale in town, that she and Montgomery had been arguing about money, and he was seen near the window just before she fell." Kate felt the blood drain from her face. "Another wife, another suspicious death." Martha nodded grimly. "When I told your father, do you know what he said? He said that could have been Katherine if she hadn't been so stubborn. He said it with satisfaction, Katherine. As if your defiance had cost him a business opportunity, but at least you weren't dead." Thomas's hand tightened around Kate's, his face hardening at this confirmation of what they had suspected about Montgomery. "That's when I knew I couldn't stay," Martha continued. "I packed a few belongings while he was napping, took my personal savings from where I'd hidden them over the years and left. I hoped, that perhaps you might have room for your mother at least until I decide where to go next." Kate looked at Thomas, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded without hesitation. "Mrs. Andrews, you're welcome to stay with us for as long as you wish. This house has plenty of room, and Kate would benefit from your company, especially with the baby coming soon." Relief washed over Martha's face. "Thank you, both of you. I know I wasn't the mother I should have been, Katherine. I let fear rule me, let your father's domination become the pattern of our lives. I should have protected you." Kate moved to sit beside her mother, taking her hands. "You did the best you could in the circumstances you were given. And you're here now, that's what matters." With Martha's arrival, the household dynamic shifted in subtle but positive ways. Kate found in her mother an unexpected ally and friend as they worked together to prepare for the baby's arrival. Martha, freed from her husband's oppressive presence, revealed aspects of her personality that Kate had never seen: a dry wit, a talent for organization, and a surprisingly modern outlook on many issues. Thomas, too, discovered a newfound appreciation for his mother-in-law. Her practical knowledge of household management complemented Mrs. Cooper's skills, and her presence seemed to ease some of the worry Kate had carried about the impending birth. "She's not at all what I expected," Thomas admitted to Kate one night as they prepared for bed. "From the way you described your home life, I imagined her as completely broken by your father." "I think perhaps she was," Kate replied thoughtfully. "But there must have been a core of strength inside her all along. It just took the right circumstances to bring it out." "Like mother, like daughter," Thomas said with a smile, placing a gentle hand on Kate's rounded belly. On May 3, 1876, after 18 hours of labor that tested both Kate's endurance and Thomas's nerves, William Thomas Malone entered the world with a lusty cry that Mrs. Cooper declared was loud enough to call the cattle home. "He's perfect," Kate whispered, cradling their son as Thomas sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, his face awestruck as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "He has your hair," Thomas observed, touching the copper fuzz on the baby's head. "And your determination. Did you hear the doctor? He said he's never seen a firstborn come into the world so decisively." Kate laughed softly, wincing slightly at the movement. "Let's hope he has your patience as well, or we're in for some challenging years ahead." The first weeks of William's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and moments of such transcendent joy that Kate sometimes found herself weeping from the sheer wonder of it all. Thomas proved to be a devoted father, insisting on taking his turn walking the floor with the fretful infant in the wee hours so Kate could rest. Martha, now firmly established as a permanent member of the household, stepped into the role of grandmother with enthusiasm, allowing the new parents occasional hours to themselves, precious time to reconnect as husband and wife, rather than merely as mother and father to their demanding son. As summer bloomed across the ranch lands, the Lazy M prospered under Thomas's guidance and Kate's shrewd business sense. The year's calf crop was the largest yet, and a new breeding bull purchased from a prestigious Texas ranch promised to improve their stock even further. In late July, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset, a letter arrived that would test the peace they had built. It was addressed to Martha Andrews, and the handwriting was unmistakably Jeremiah's. "He wants me to come home," Martha said after reading it silently. "He says he forgives my momentary madness and is willing to restore me to my proper place in his household." Her voice held a mixture of disbelief and bitter amusement. "Will you go?" Kate asked softly, adjusting baby William in her arms as he nursed. Martha folded the letter deliberately and placed it in her pocket. "No," she said with unexpected firmness. "I have found something here that I never had in 30 years of marriage to your father. Respect. I won't trade that for the false security of his house ever again." Thomas reached over to squeeze his mother-in-law's hand. "You always have a home with us, Martha, for as long as you want it." 2 days later, they received word that Jeremiah Andrews had suffered a second, more severe stroke upon receiving Martha's reply to his letter. This time, Kate did not hesitate. "We should go to him," she told Thomas as they prepared for bed. "Not to reconcile or forgive necessarily, but because it's the right thing to do. And because I want to show him what he lost, a daughter who found her voice, a grandson who will never know the fear of speaking his mind." Thomas studied his wife's face, marveling yet again at the strength that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "Are you certain?" "The last time you faced him, I was terrified," Kate admitted. "But I'm not that woman anymore. I'm Katherine Malone now, wife, mother, partner in one of the most successful ranches in the territory. I have nothing to fear from Jeremiah Andrews." The journey to Winnemucca took a full day, with frequent stops to tend to 3-month-old William's needs. They arrived at the Andrews mansion as evening shadows lengthened across the town, the imposing structure looking somehow smaller and less intimidating to Kate than it had in her memories. The housekeeper who answered their knock seemed startled to see them but recovered quickly. "Miss Katherine, I mean, Mrs. Malone. The doctor is with your father now. He's not expected to last the night." Kate nodded, handing William to Thomas as they followed the housekeeper to the master bedroom. The room was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the evening light. Dr. Wilson stood by the bed making notes in a small book. On the bed lay Jeremiah Andrews, his once powerful frame shrunken, his face slack on one side, his breathing labored. "He's been asking for you, doctor," Wilson said quietly to Kate. "Though his speech is difficult to understand, I'm not sure he'll recognize you." Kate approached the bed, Thomas a reassuring presence at her side with their son. "Father," she said clearly, "it's Katherine. I've come to see you." Jeremiah's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. When they fixed on Kate, a spark of recognition lit them. His right hand, the one still under his control, reached feebly toward her. "Ka." He struggled, the word refusing to form. "Yes, it's Katherine," she said, taking his hand despite the years of anger and pain that separated them. "I'm here, and this is my husband, Thomas Malone, and our son, William." Jeremiah's gaze shifted to Thomas, then to the bundle in his arms. Something changed in the old man's eyes, a softening, perhaps, or simply resignation. "Thomas, would you bring William closer so my father can see his grandson?" Kate asked, her voice steady. Thomas stepped forward, angling the baby so Jeremiah could see the small face framed by wisps of copper hair so like Kate's, so like Martha's. "He's 3 months old," Kate continued, speaking normally as if her father could understand every word. "Strong and healthy. Already trying to hold his head up on his own. Mrs. Cooper says he's the most determined baby she's ever seen. Thomas thinks he has my temperament and your business sense." A tear slipped from the corner of Jeremiah's eye, tracking down the paralyzed side of his face. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. "I forgive you, Father," Kate said softly, the words surprising even herself. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I won't carry the burden of hatred any longer. It has no place in the life I've built." Jeremiah's fingers tightened weakly around hers. His eyes held hers for a long moment, something unreadable passing through them. Then they closed, his breathing settling into a rhythm slightly less labored than before. "He's sleeping now," Dr. Wilson said, returning to the bedside. "It's a good sign that he recognized you. The will to live can be a powerful medicine." Contrary to expectations, Jeremiah Andrews did not die that night. Over the next few days, he stabilized enough that Dr. Wilson cautiously revised his prognosis. He would never fully recover. The damage from the strokes was too extensive, but he might live for months or even years with proper care. Kate and Thomas remained in Winnemucca for a week, staying at the hotel rather than at the Andrews mansion. Each day, Kate visited her father, sometimes bringing William, sometimes coming alone. They never spoke. Jeremiah had lost the ability to form words, but something shifted in their silent encounters. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of peace. Before they returned to the ranch, Kate made arrangements for her father's care, hiring a competent nurse and ensuring that the household would continue to run smoothly in Martha's absence. She also consulted with her father's attorney about his business affairs, which had begun to suffer during his illness. "You have a good head for business," the attorney observed as they reviewed the bank's ledgers. "Your father trained you well, despite his traditional views on a woman's place." "He taught me by example," Kate replied. "I watched and learned, even when he thought I was merely practicing my needlework." On their final day in Winnemucca, as they prepared to depart, Kate made one last visit to her father. She found him sitting in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at the town he had helped build. "We're leaving today, Father," she said, sitting in the chair beside him. "Thomas needs to get back to the ranch, and William does better in his own nursery." She paused, studying the old man's profile. "I'll write regularly, and perhaps we'll visit again in the fall. Martha sends her regards. She's found a new life at the Lazy M, helping with William and keeping the household accounts." Jeremiah turned his head slightly toward her, his good eye revealing a lucidity that had been absent in previous visits. "I want you to know something," Kate continued, her voice soft but firm. "That day in the cellar, when Thomas broke down the door and led me out, it wasn't just an escape. It was the beginning of the life I was meant to live. A life where my voice matters, where my thoughts aren't dismissed because I'm a woman, where my son will grow up knowing that true strength comes from respect, not fear." She reached out to touch her father's hand. "I hope somewhere inside you can be happy for me, Father. But even if you can't, know that I am happier than I ever dreamed possible. That's my wish for you as well, peace, if not happiness." As they rode away from Winnemucca, William sleeping peacefully in the sling Kate had fashioned to carry him against her chest, Thomas glanced at his wife. "No regrets?" he asked. Kate considered the question, her gaze turning back briefly to the town receding behind them, then forward to the open landscape ahead where the Lazy M waited. "No regrets," she confirmed. "Only gratitude for the path that brought me here, even the difficult parts, especially the difficult parts." Thomas reached across to take her hand, his touch as reassuring as it had been that night in the cellar when he'd first led her to freedom. "Home, then?" Kate smiled, squeezing his hand. "Home." 5 years passed, bringing changes both to the Malone family and to the Lazy M ranch. William grew from an infant to a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's quick mind and his father's steady temperament. He was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Martha Malone, born in the summer of 1878, with dark hair like her father's and the same determined spirit that characterized the entire family. The ranch prospered under Thomas and Kate's joint management. They expanded their holdings to over 8,000 acres, introduced new breeding stock that improved their herds, and established the Lazy M brand as synonymous with quality throughout the Western Territories. Martha Andrews found unexpected fulfillment in her role as grandmother and household manager, her organizational skills and quiet wisdom becoming invaluable to the growing ranch operation. She never returned to Winnemucca except for brief visits, even after Jeremiah's death in the winter of 1879. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Thomas surprised Kate with a special gift, the deed to a new schoolhouse he had built on the ranch property, not just for their children but for those of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders as well. "I've hired a teacher from San Francisco," he explained as he showed her the neat clapboard building with its rows of desks and large windows to let in the Nevada sunlight. "She comes highly recommended and has modern ideas about education for both boys and girls." Kate walked through the schoolroom, tears filling her eyes as she ran her hand along the slate blackboard. "It's perfect, Thomas. A place where children can learn to think for themselves, to question, to speak their minds without fear." "That's what I thought you'd say," Thomas replied with a smile. "There's one more thing. The school needs a name." He led her outside to where a covered sign hung above the door. With a flourish, he pulled away the cloth to reveal the words painted in bold letters: "Katherine Malone Academy for Independent Minds." Kate laughed through her tears, wrapping her arms around her husband's neck. "You ridiculous, wonderful man. It's the most perfect gift anyone has ever given me." "Not the most perfect," Thomas corrected gently, his hand resting briefly on her still flat stomach. "I think that honor goes to our newest addition, due to join us this winter, according to Dr. Wilson." Kate's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I only suspected myself a few days ago, and I wasn't certain enough to tell you yet." Thomas grinned. "Mrs. Cooper noticed you turning green at the smell of coffee yesterday morning. She may have mentioned it to me." "That woman is impossible," Kate said with mock indignation. "Nothing escapes her notice." "Are you happy about it?" Thomas asked, his face growing serious. "I know we hadn't planned on a third child quite so soon." Kate placed her hand over his on her stomach. "I'm delighted. Our children are the physical embodiment of what we've built together, a legacy of love and respect that will continue long after we're gone." As they walked back to the ranch house, arm in arm in the golden light of the Nevada sunset, Kate reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the darkness of her father's cellar to the open skies of the Lazy M. From silence to a voice that carried weight and meaning. From fear to the deep security of true partnership. She thought of the young woman she had been, shackled not just by iron chains, but by the expectations of a society that valued women only for their obedience and silence. That woman could never have imagined the life Kate now led: wife, mother, respected businesswoman, namesake of a school that would educate generations of young minds. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was thinking about doors," Kate replied. "The ones that trap us, the ones that free us, and the ones we build ourselves. That night when you broke down the cellar door and led me out, you didn't just rescue me from a physical prison. You showed me that I could break down all the other doors that confine me, the doors of convention, of fear, of self-doubt." Thomas stopped, turning to face her fully in the fading light. "You give me too much credit, Kate. I may have broken one door, but you're the one who walked through it, who chose to build a new life rather than accept the limitations others tried to impose on you." Kate stood on tiptoe to kiss him, a gesture as natural and necessary as breathing after 5 years of marriage. "Perhaps we broke down that first door together then, and we've been building new ones ever since, doors that open to possibility rather than closing off potential." As they continued toward home, where William and Elizabeth waited with Martha and Mrs. Cooper, where the ranch hands were gathering for the anniversary celebration Thomas had planned, Kate felt a profound contentment settle in her soul. The journey from the cellar to this moment had not been easy or straightforward. There had been challenges: Jeremiah's resistance, the adjustments of early marriage, the demands of motherhood while helping to run a growing ranch, the inevitable conflicts that arose between two strong-willed individuals building a life together. But through it all, one truth had remained constant. In Thomas Malone, Kate had found not just a rescuer but a partner who valued her mind as much as her heart, who saw her strength as an asset rather than a threat, who loved her not despite her outspokenness, but because of it. And in that love, she had found the freedom to become fully herself, Katherine Malone, a woman who would never again be silenced for speaking her mind.